Today, we're going to dive into a legal battle that dragged on for over 20 years, Metrobank versus Salazar Realty. And get this, it's a story where a company lost pretty much everything, and the final outcome didn't depend on who was right or wrong, but on which courthouse door the lawyers decided to knock on. So let's just start with this question. Imagine you're a shareholder, and you have to watch your company's leaders basically give away its future. And then the board just does nothing about it. What do? Well, this isn't just some made-up scenario. It is exactly what the stockholders of Salazar Realty Corporation had to deal with. All right, Section 1, a deal gone wrong. Our story kicks off like so many corporate dramas do, with a loan. But this was no simple transaction. Oh no. This was a deal that tangled up two different companies and put one of them on a path to losing everything it had. So check out how this whole thing spiraled over 9 years. It starts off simply enough. Back in '92, a company called Tacloban RIS gets a loan. But by 1996, here's the twist. Another company, Salazar Realty, puts its own properties up to guarantee that loan. So when Tacloban RIS finally defaults in 2001, it's not just their problem anymore. Metrobank forecloses, and just like that, Salazar Realty loses its land. And we need to be super clear here. We're not talking about some spare land the company had lying around. The 5 properties they mortgaged, that was basically the entire company. It was a massive all-or-nothing bet supposedly made by their own board to back another company's debt. So that brings us to Section 2, shareholders fight back. The company's assets are gone, the board is completely silent, so a group of shareholders decides they are not just going to sit back and watch their investment disappear. They decide to do something about it themselves. And this is where things get really interesting. A group of stockholders, led by Ramon Salazar Jr., decides to sue Metrobank. Their argument? That the mortgage was completely bogus and unauthorized from the start. But because they were suing for a company that wouldn't sue for itself, they had to use a very special kind of legal move. The legal tool they pulled out is called a derivative suit. It's this powerful last-ditch option for shareholders. It's basically them saying, look, if our management won't protect the company, then we will. The shareholders literally step into the shoes of the corporation to fight on its behalf. Section 3, the wrong courtroom. But here is the major twist. Metrobank's defense, it didn't really focus on whether the mortgage was good or bad. Instead, they attacked the lawsuit on a completely different level, its location. They hit back with this one simple but absolutely devastating question. And by doing that, they shifted the entire focus of the case. All of a sudden, nobody was talking about land or loans anymore. They were talking about jurisdiction. Which court even had the power to hear the case to begin with? You see, the two sides were looking at the exact same problem in completely different ways. The SARC shareholders were saying, hey, we're suing a bank to cancel a mortgage. That's a regular case for a regular court. But Metrobank's argument was, no. The real fight here is internal. It's between the shareholders and their own board. And that's an intra-corporate controversy, which has to go to a special commercial court. And that concept, intra-corporate controversy, is absolutely key here. The law creates these special commercial courts for a reason. They're staffed with judges who have expertise in these super complex corporate fights. The whole idea is to get better, faster rulings. So, picking the right court, it's everything. Okay, Section 4, the Supreme Court's ruling. So for years, this case bounced around the legal system, and the whole thing was stuck on this one question of jurisdiction. Finally, it landed at the Supreme Court for the final word. Now, initially, the Court of Appeals actually sided with the shareholders. Their logic was pretty simple. Metrobank is an outsider, right? It's not part of the company's internal family drama. So this has to be a regular case for a regular court. For a moment there, it really looked like a win for the shareholders. But then, in a total plot twist, the Supreme Court said, not so fast. They completely disagreed with the lower court. And that decision didn't just upend this case. It would end up setting a huge precedent for corporate law. So the Supreme Court's logic was to look past who was being sued and ask why the lawsuit existed in the first place. Why was this a derivative suit? Because the board failed to do its job. And that failure, that fight between the shareholders and their own board, that's the real heart of the dispute. And that, they said, makes it an internal, intra-corporate matter, end of story. So the final verdict was just mind-blowing. After more than 20 years of legal battles, the Supreme Court found that the entire case had been heard in the wrong courtroom from day one. The judge who heard the case for all those years never actually had the legal authority to decide it.
Which brings us to our final section, why the how matters. So after a 20-year fight, what happened? What was the final outcome for these shareholders? Well, the answer is a really tough lesson in legal procedure. The Supreme Court dismissed the entire case, threw it out. And here's the crazy part. Not because the shareholders were wrong about the mortgage, not because the bank proved its case, but simply because they knocked on the wrong judicial door 2 decades earlier.
This case is just such a powerful reminder. These procedural rules, they aren't just little technicalities. They are the actual foundation that a case is built on. And the court made it crystal clear. Any derivative suit, by its very nature, is an internal corporate fight and has to be filed in a special commercial court. It just goes to show you that in law, how you fight is often just as important as why you fight.
But it really leaves you with a tough question, doesn't it? I mean, in this case, after 2 whole decades of litigation, did that rule really uphold legal integrity? Or did it just become a barrier that prevented shareholders from ever getting a final answer on their claim? It's a fascinating question about that tricky balance between following the process and actually achieving justice.